One of the skills that I've developed is to not be afraid to appear stupid. Don't be afraid to say, I don't understand what you're saying.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 75. So I have with me today Justin Workman and Rob Minch. They're back in the studio. A couple months ago, Justin and Rob, we answered questions from our listeners, and it was a big hit. I got a lot of great response, and as well as a lot of great new questions for us to answer. So thanks for coming back today to answer some new questions from our listeners.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be back.
We have questions from all over the country. We've got a lot, so we'll see how many we can get through. But Let me start with this one. This is from Courtney in Grand Rapids. Courtney writes, I have reserves set aside for my properties, but wonder if there's a general rule on how much to put aside per door or property. Let's assume single-family home or small multi. What is your philosophy, and how much does it vary by investor? So we've got three investors here. Let's see how it varies. Rob, why don't we start with you on that one?
Okay. I mean, really, it depends on, first of all, what kind of property you're dealing with, whether it be a single family or a multi-unit, and just understanding your property, knowing, like, for instance, how old the roof is, how old the hot water heater is, how old the furnace, how old are your utilities, your appliances, and just looking at it and seeing, what you feel like is going to be the next thing that is going to need to be done. I wouldn't say that there is a specific number for me personally. What I would say is I understand my property, and I'm making sure that I'm doing that based off looking at the property individually.
Great. Justin, what about you?
And I agree with what Rob's saying. Is a lot of repairs and major capital improvements, ahead of time that they're coming up. Your roof's getting older, your furnace is getting older. So those types of stuff you can save for and build up that fund, that reserve fund for your capital improvements. As far as repair items go, I'd always keep a couple $1,000 around. It doesn't necessarily need to be per door, but you need to be able to cover a furnace.
And you're talking single-family home.
Yeah, I'm talking single-family residential.
You're going to have a couple $1,000 in reserves
at a minimum.
As a cushion,
if you're just talking about one or two properties, I think you at least have to have that. Again, if
per
you're
property.
I don't think it's necessarily per property. You can probably cut that down to maybe $1,000 every additional property after you have a couple to start with. Again, if you're paying mortgage and a mortgage on the property, I'd probably want to see you have probably 3 months of mortgage payments saved, just in case you have issues where you don't get a tenant in, or you have a major turnover, or do some major repairs. So it's going to vary. I mean, on your spreadsheet, when you're first running the analysis, I think I normally figure about 10% goes into repairs and capital improvements.
Is that 10% of the rent income?
10% of gross rents, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, is usually what I factor in, but I don't necessarily hold that in a traditional account just for that day. It's just kind of the factors when I figure out the property. But as you go through the process, as long as you keep that reserve money in place, you kind of get to a level where you're comfortable with, just leaving some money in the business account for those repairs. Just don't take it all out and spend it.
Yeah, you kind of develop a sense of how much you need to have in an account. And you definitely do need to have money set aside. So I agree with your 10% rule. On single family and small multis, depending on its condition and its age, 10% of gross rents should be reserved for those kinds of expenses. Now, here in Grand Rapids, where we buy, a lot of these properties are 100 years old. So you're dealing with older properties. In those cases, I will usually allocate about 15% of gross rents on my smaller multis toward maintenance and capital improvements. And when it's the smaller multis, I sort of lump those two together. After I've acquired them, put the money into fixing what needs to be fixed, the ongoing expense, I'm allocating 15% of gross rents toward maintenance and capital improvements. Now, when you get into the larger multis, and you're getting large commercial loans or small commercial loans, then the lenders typically like to see anywhere from $200 to $400 per door set aside. And obviously, the newer the property is and the better condition it's in, the lower you're going to need to set aside per door. If your property is 1970 or older, the bank will want to see at least $350 a door. I typically will reserve $400 to $500 per door, just because it's an older property. You're going to have some issues that you need to consider, and I like to be very conservative on that number, which is why on some of my properties I do allocate $500 a door.
Now, is that $500 a door per month or per year? It's got to be a per year.
Well, yeah, it's yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds much better.
That's a little better, because otherwise I'm looking at you're renting a building for $600 a month and you're putting $500 aside. No, it's a per year cost.
Yes, you're right. That's per year. So you're allocating per door per year. Thank you for
I just want to clarify that you're putting aside $50 to $60 a month, not $500 a month per door. And I think it varies too. When you start out with one, it seems like you need a larger amount, because you don't have the cushion of the other rents coming in. You need more money in that reserve fund. As you grow, you don't need to keep, say we come up with a number of, I don't know, $3,500 for one. You don't need $3,500 for 10 of them. That's $35,000 sitting there that's not making you money. You may be able to cut that number down to $15,000 or whatever. You just need to have money aside that's going to cover any unforeseen repairs, and you need to continue to improve your property as long as you own it. So that's why it does vary investor to investor and property to property.
Yeah. And it occurs to me that I need to kind of clarify with the larger apartments, that $350, $400 a door that I might reserve, that's for capital improvements.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the bank or the lender will want to escrow that every month. So on some of my larger properties, they're escrowing the equivalent of $350 a door a year, and they're escrowing it each month. Does that make sense from the math? So they're dividing by 12, escrowing that amount.
It does make sense.
It does make sense.
That is for capital improvements, not for maintenance. Maintenance is a separate line item. Okay. When I get to my smaller properties, then I kind of bundle it all together, the maintenance and the capital improvements.
And I think there are some requirements through FHA, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, that require you to have a certain amount of reserve set aside for against the amount you've borrowed. I'm not positive on what that is, but I know there are some requirements of, maybe 2 to 10% that you need to have in a reserve fund or account or in that bank account to cover some of those costs. And so look into those as well.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is from Courtney as well. She sent a bunch of great questions, so thank you, Courtney. What repairs should I, as a landlord, know how to do? Which are the most cost-effective skills to learn? Justin, you do a lot of the work on your properties. Yeah. Why don't you give your opinion on that?
I do a lot of work on stuff. Initially, it's the complete rehab on them, and then, it's continual maintenance and that kind of thing. But I think the most important thing to do is to learn who to call. So when somebody calls you and it's an unknown problem of there's water in the basement, I think those are one of those situations where you need to figure out, do you need a plumber? Do you need an HVAC guy? Who do you need to call to fix the problem? I think that's the initial diagnosis can save you a service call later on. And I think that's a real key, is to figure out which person you need to call to properly fix the problem. And it's really more of a visual assessment sometimes of, okay, well, this is leaking. I need either a plumber to fix the hot water heater, or the condenser's leaking in the furnace, so I need to call the furnace guy so he can come and fix the pump or something along those lines. So I think there's a ton of repairs that you can do. It's going to depend on the individual, what they're comfortable with, what time they have. But I think if you can do a little bit of diagnosing of problems yourself, you'll save yourself a lot in the future, as far as if you're managing your own properties.
If you're managing your own properties.
Yep.
Rob, what about you?
I totally agree with Justin. The best skill that you can learn is to be able to diagnose the problem, so you can dispatch the proper professional to take care of it, and that truly will save you a lot of money.
Yeah. If you can avoid just paying one service charge, one trip fee out to look at a problem that's not their problem. It's $150 that you save or whatever their cost is. So it will add up over time. Anybody can paint, anybody can do flooring for the most part. So, but those aren't always the best use of your time.
Yeah, and that's where I come down on the best use of my time. The best use of my time is not dealing with any of this, because if to me, if you are focusing on the smaller picture, which might be some repairs or paint jobs that you can do yourself, you're not focusing on the bigger picture, which is making money and building a portfolio and creating passive wealth so you can be financially independent. So that's why I always have a management company managing my properties, because I trust them to make those decisions as to what needs to be done and who's the best person to do it.
Yeah.
I can't disagree with that.
I agree.
Some of us are just cheap, and wanna save every dime we can.
And you're saving dimes and what's that saying? Penny wise, pound foolish. No, I don't want to say that about you guys. You guys are very smart. Very.
Some days it's the case, though.
Yeah, you guys do very well with your portfolio. All right, Carl in Los Angeles has asked us a question. He says, "I'm afraid of evictions. How do I set myself up so that I minimize the risk and bad tenants?"
I think it starts when you're screening tenants. You don't want the ones that promise you the world. They have a bunch of excuses. I mean, when you screen properly, it helps. But that doesn't mean that even with the best screened tenant, they're not going to have a problem. I've got a tenant right now that's been there a couple years. Great lady. But she had an accident at work and went on disability, and then her disability dropped off, and now she didn't pay rent. Unfortunately, it's time to tell her she's either got to pay or go. And that happens in life. People have misfortunate accidents, and you just got to go through the process. And it's not an extremely painful process. It is heartbreaking at times, but you've got to just go through it and follow along. It's not that big of a deal. You give them a notice, you go to court, and hopefully it doesn't get that far. But it happens. Everybody's got to do it. It's scary at first. Get an attorney to help you follow the correct procedures, or go to the RPOA. They'll help you along through the process. But you got to do it. It's part of the business.
Rob, have you had to evict anybody?
I have. And I would say make sure wherever you're at, join your local RIA and make sure that you utilize everything that they've got, because
or RPOA.
RPOA, for instance, in Grand Rapids. And, they can walk you through. They've got all the proper forms. They can tell you what to do. Obviously I've had to do it before, and they walked me through it. And, it is part of the business. It's just something that happens, and, just utilize your resources and do what you have to do.
Yeah. And I've never had to do an eviction. I've always had my management companies handle that. So, again, it's like one of those things. Maybe I would benefit from having to go through it at least once, but I'll never know.
Yeah. And until you do it, you don't know that side of the business. I mean, I'm one that was never in court prior to doing evictions. So it's one of those things of, yes, you're nervous the first time you walk in the courtroom and have to stand in front of the judge. But after you do one, you realize, well, there's no need to even show up. My attorney can handle it, and we'll move on. So,
yeah. All right. Speaking of moving on, this is a question from Ben in West Michigan. Ben has 14 rental units, and his W-2 income is around $32,000, but he's got a net worth of $250,000. I assume from the rental units. He'd like to get into buying 8 to 24 units at a time. So it sounds like mid-size, multifamily. What are the best banks in the Grand Rapids area that would lend on this? And what type of team would I need to get the banker to say yes? I.e. financial partner, property manager, etc. So, Rob, why don't we start with you on the bank part? There's a lot of good banks out there, especially in Grand Rapids. A lot of good smaller community and mid-sized banks. But what's your take on that?
There are several options available. There are credit unions, there are commercial banks, there are regular banks. Talk to somebody that's in the RPOA and ask them who they've used and who they've had a good experience with, and start with that. And then, ask, once you make that relationship and you get introduced and you talk to that banker, ask them what they're looking for, to see what you're going to need to move forward.
Yeah, when you get into commercial multifamily, the banker is your partner.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to vet the deal and the numbers just as carefully as you are, if not more carefully. So establishing that relationship up front and getting them on your team up front, that's key to getting a deal done.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I think it's that local person. I bank at a small local bank, and I go in there and deposit rent checks. I'm in there at least once a month. But while I'm in there, I say hi to the loan officer. I talk to some of the girls at the desk. You get to know these people. And it's that relationship building that's so key to this game. It really is. So getting to know those people, they will help you out. They will work for you when it comes time to try to fit you into that box. When you're dealing with the bigger banks, a lot of times you don't fit into their box necessarily. So they're not as flexible on what they can and can't do. But I think the local, smaller community banks, regional banks are a little more flexible on what they can and can't lend on. When you're dealing with smaller multifamily, you do have a history, it sounds like, of rentals in your past, so they may be able to qualify you as a property manager. But some of them may want a commercial property manager on your side or on your team for this property.
Yeah, it's very, they look at that very carefully.
Look at that,
Who is managing this property?
Absolutely.
And is this a team that we can trust, or is it mom and pop who are going to let it go to pot?
Yep. Yeah, and same thing on the financial side. If you're only making $30,000 a year, you may not have enough capital to put that 25% down or more, by the time you add reserves, et cetera. So you may need a financial partner in this. In this endeavor. So yeah, I love the local banks. I love staying local. But that's my preference. It's that relationship. It's getting to know those people that I think will really help you out in the end.
Yeah, and I think from a team perspective, there's probably a couple other people you want to have on your team. I really advocate having a strong property management company on your team, because they can do so much for you in the acquisition. When you're looking at a property, doing the physical inspection, even before you get to the contract phase, just kind of helping you determine, hey, is there upside in the rents? The property is in this location. This is a good location. This is a bad location. We can bump the rents up. If you have a management company that knows what they're doing, then they can really help you get your arms around the property before you acquire it to understand where the upsides and the downsides are on it. So that's key. Having the banking relationship, the lender relationship, knowing what the terms are going to look like before you make an offer, because the last thing you want to do is make an offer on a property and then find out that the loan terms, you're only going to be able to get a 65% loan-to-value loan as opposed to an 80% loan-to-value loan. Or the cost of acquiring those funds is going to be higher. It's very important to establish that with a lender before you make an offer on a property.
I agree. It's a relationship that you build early on so that you can use it at a later date and time. And you've got to know what you're going to be approved for and what they're going to require prior to making those offers.
Yeah,
especially in today's market.
Yeah, and if they have your financial information, your W-2 your tax returns, and they can vet you, they'll say, you really do need a financial partner who's got a little bit more financial strength and a little bit more experience. Or conversely, you fit into our box. We'll make this loan to you up to this value.
Yeah, and I can see you say you have a net worth of $250. Well, with 14 properties, you may have a large debt load already. So you're probably you may be considered a higher risk to them in general. So finding that right bank or that right lender and finding out what they want of you to either have that financial partner or what property management companies they prefer, maybe. I think that will help you find a property in the future.
I definitely start with cultivating that relationship with the banker and start from there.
Yeah. Who else would you have on your team, Rob?
You've already mentioned, obviously, a good property manager. And again, look at people at the RPOA that have done it and talk to them and, see how they did it.
Yeah, and I think you're missing a broker in there. A lot of people
with the brokers.
A lot of people don't like brokers, but they can help and make and break some deals. But it will help in the end. I think having somebody else on your side up as a part of your team moving forward.
Yeah, broker. I would add an attorney who can take a look at the contract, help answer legal questions, because you're going to run into things that you'll need some sort of legal advice. And if you're syndicating, I don't know if Ben intends to syndicate, but you definitely need a good syndication attorney. And I would also say a CPA. If you need a CPA on your team who can look at it from a tax standpoint, and look at if you're putting together an operating agreement, take a look at that just to see if there's any language in there that's going to cost you money later on from a tax standpoint.
And I think it also having a CPA on your team brings that level of professionalism to you. When your bank goes to look at your tax return and it's done by a CPA, it looks a certain way. They don't question as many little details. So I think that helps along the way as well, just to have your taxes done early and often. So. And
one more person I would add is an insurance broker, because a lot of times you can make a little bit more money if you find better insurance, and having a good broker to say, all right, here's the property, here's the quotes I've got. This is what you're going to be paying for insurance. That can really help you fix your numbers, or dial in on what your numbers are going to be.
What your true costs are for the property.
Sure.
Yeah, are we forgetting anybody? I'm sure we're forgetting some important.
I'm sure we are.
Mortgage broker, insurance, syndication attorney, regular real estate attorney.
I think we've covered a
CPA,
pretty
insurance
good
broker. Yeah. All right, Ben, I hope that's helpful. Let's go to Rayanne. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, in Colorado. Okay, well, this kind of goes in with our last question, but it's, what do I need to do to look good for a bank to loan to? I take that as, if I want to get a loan from a bank, what do I need to provide them, and what do I need to do so that they'll give me a loan? How do I need to appear to them?
Strong financials, stability, experience, the right team.
Yeah, eliminate all your bad debt as much as possible. Pay off some things if you're able to. I think there's a lot of things you can do to help boost your credit score. A solid job, solid work history, all of that helps along the way.
So for a residential loan, they're definitely going to be looking at you as the borrower
more
very closely. So that's where you need
with single family rentals. Anything under a 4 unit, they're going to look specifically at you.
Yeah,
you're
the
capable
guarantor
of paying that loan?
Yeah. Yeah, they're not looking at the property and the income it's generating. They're looking at you. So definitely having the tax returns, having a good credit score. I don't know what that credit score needs to be. Whether it's got to be 650, 700 or better.
The guidelines change by all the time.
We've been selling houses at under 600 credit score these days to
580.
first-time buyers. So
it's if
way
you're under
down
600,
today.
you can get it.
Yeah, from where it used to be, but it varies. Every bank's going to be different too. Every loan officer is going to be different. What they will push and what they won't push.
Yeah, and you should talk to them. To really answer that question, you should talk to them. But taking a good hard look at yourself and your financials, depending on where you are in life, maybe you have a bookkeeper and you can provide a profit and loss statement for yourself. You can provide a balance sheet. These are things that bankers like to see. It shows you have some financial savvy. Now, once you get into the commercial world, if you're borrowing money, now the lender's taking a closer look at you, or not at you, but at the property and the property's ability to pay back the loan from its rent income, the performance. So then I always find it very helpful to put together a package, kind of a pro forma on the property. And this may be way overboard, but it helps. And I use a software package that you can buy online, and you can create charts. Usually I'll put together like historical numbers on the property, maybe the past 2 or 3 years, what the income and expenses have been, and then my projected numbers, income and expenses. I include photos. I include a description of the property. I include kind of a little story. I like to always tell a story because people like stories. Here's the property that I'm buying. Here's what I intend to do with it. So this helps. I mean, if you want to get the strongest loan possible, it helps.
It absolutely will help.
Be able to present your lender with a package that says, this is what I'm going to do.
And the more you can provide for them and the more you understand what they need, the easier it makes their job. And in turn, the more they will help you out. Because if they're asking you for anything and everything constantly, they're going to get fed up and they're not going to want to work as hard for you to push this loan through. So the more you can prepare for them ahead of time, the more you communicate with them ahead of time as far as what do I need for this, the better off you're going to be throughout the process.
Yeah, and having that relationship with the lender is crucial because they'll send you an email saying, here's the things you need to prepare for me. It's usually going to be, a lot of times they want to see the tax returns for the seller. At least the parts of the tax returns that reflect the property, because what they're reporting to the IRS, they may not be reporting to you as the potential buyer. So they want to see those. They want to see profit and loss statements and financial statements for the previous 3 years. They want to see a current rent roll. And I'm sure there's some other things that they're going to ask for. But if it's in the commercial world, 5 units or more, these are things that the lenders are going to want to see. They may also want to see the financial strength. Do you have the financial strength to take on this loan? And if you don't, who are you partnering with that does? Thank you, Rayanne. Well, Courtney asked a bunch of questions, so let's go back to Courtney's next question. What resources do you recommend to work on negotiation skills? What other skills do you recommend that investors and landlords work on? Justin, let's start with you. What do you recommend as far as learning more about how to be a good negotiator?
I don't know. I think it's a time-tested thing. You try things, you work on things. I personally love negotiating in person. I love that talk back and forth and, be face-to-face and talk about issues and try to work things out. I'm not as big of a fan on paper. When you're writing real estate contracts, sending them in, you get something else back. That drives me nuts. It's like I just want to work through something and come to a conclusion and write it up. I don't want to shoot things back and forth 6 times so we can work something out. So I like that face-to-face, push ideas forward and backward. And again, when you're negotiating, you kind of have your spot that you want to hit, and you start off somewhere below that. So you've got some wiggle room to work to where you really need to get to. So,
books or resources that you would recommend?
There's so many good books out there. The one that I think of off the top of my head is The Art of the Deal. Donald's book.
Donald Trump?
Donald Trump, yeah.
A little-known author. Named Donald
author.
Trump.
President of the United States. It's his attorney that wrote that one, I believe. But they talk about a lot of good tactics and just some of his strategies along the way of how he would try to negotiate deals and how he would have something that he really wanted, and he would come up with some smaller things that he could give away so he got what he really wanted out of it.
Does it give you insight into how he's performing as a president?
It could. I mean, people definitely take it that way. You hear a lot of that in the news all the time of, he may be pushing a different agenda than what he's tweeting out. Mm-hmm. So it depends on how you want to look at that and what you want to read into. But I think there's some strong tips as far as you've got to be willing to give on some things. You can't just take a hard-nosed stance of, I'm going to pay X and we're going to close on this date and this is how it's going to be. You've got to have some items that you can give on, some flexibility, because it'll help that negotiation process. It'll help close that deal. So be flexible. Keep some oddball things in mind if you need to. You never know what you're going to get until you ask. Don't be the first one to name a price. There's a lot of little things that you can do along the way to help.
Rob, what about you?
I agree. I really like the dialogue. I really want to be educated about the property. And, obviously I've got that number in my head, but you do have to be flexible. You've got to be able to give to get something and, just know what you're talking about and, just do it in a respectful, manner. You can generally, get something.
Yeah, and what about books or any resources that you would recommend someone check out?
I read The Art of the Deal, a number of years ago. There are a lot of good points in there, honestly. I really, I think I've learned a lot of negotiating skills just through time and, working on deals, and finding out what works and what doesn't. But, really, I just like to be educated about the property and, just try to be fair about things and, try to make it work.
And there's so much day-to-day negotiation I find in what I do. I mean, dealing with contractors and getting
absolutely.
Prices and estimates
Constantly.
of everybody. Even when you go to the store, everybody thinks, well, the sticker price is what you have to pay. Well, no, you can negotiate anything you want, just nobody does. So say you go to Home Depot and you don't like the price on something or you're buying a big quantity of it. Well, you go to the contractor service desk and you ask the guy, well, what can I get off of this? Where am I at? And they'll work with you on stuff. It's amazing how many little things you can do throughout the day to save yourself money, especially when you're dealing with contractors. Maybe you take away an item off of their bid or you give them something else to do and you can kind of work some items around to get it to fit where you need to be on a project. So negotiation is key. I prefer to do it face-to-face as much as possible just because you have that relationship. You can visually see how they're responding to things. And there's that give and take. You've got to be willing to take some stuff away to get what you really want.
It's important to realize that every conversation is a negotiation of some sort. But you also shouldn't take it so far like some people do where you're negotiating everything to save yourself money. Sometimes you do overpay.
Yep.
And you just have to say, you know what, for the service and the value of that service and the timeliness of that service, I'm going to overpay, and I'm not going to try to negotiate it down. That way, when you're working with certain contractors, they will come back and work for you again. I'm sure you've been in this situation where you've just paid someone more than what you thought it was worth, but they become a loyal contractor.
Yeah, and you have that. You have your loyal guys that you don't care what they charge you. They do a great job. They're going to show up on time. They're going to do exactly what you want. It doesn't matter what you pay them. You don't care about that.
They get it done when it needs to be done.
Yeah. And that's important. That's important. I do have a book that I think is really good to read for negotiation and persuasion. It's called Pitch Anything. And it's called An Innovative Method for Presenting, Persuading, and Winning the Deal. Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff, Orenklaff. It's a newer book. It kind of takes some of the old advice about negotiation and persuasion and turns it on its head. Courtney's second part of that question is, what other skills do you recommend that investors and landlords work on?
Communication is key. I mean, you communicate all the time with different people, whether it's tenants, contractors, property managers, your loan officers. I think you've got to be able to communicate effectively. Tell them what you want, make sure everybody understands what you're after, and move forward and actually follow through. So that constant communication is big.
Be clear, be decisive, spell it out what you want, do it in a very respectful way, but, just let people know what your expectations are.
I also think that one of the skills that I've developed is to not be afraid to appear stupid. And I see this all the time in real estate. You're dealing with a broker or an attorney or someone who's very, very smart and knows their stuff very, very well, and they'll start spewing numbers at you like the cap rate is 6, and if you divide this by that, you'll get that. Don't be afraid to say, I don't understand what you're saying. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, it's almost a benefit to be the dumbest person in the room, because then you're making people clarify what they're saying, and you're not just relying on their intelligence and forcefulness to
explain it.
To hope that things are going to happen the way you want them to. You have to get them to explain it in a way that you understand, and don't be afraid to take the time to make them make you understand. And I call that the art of being stupid. And that's going to be my book.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. No, I agree completely. You want to, even if you understand it, there's good times to just have everybody clarify things, especially if you see somebody in the group not understanding all of it. I think you need that clarification to move forward.
Yeah, and when you're in a group, you might understand what the person's saying, but everybody else may not. So it's important to just take a step back and say, make it clear. Talk to me like I'm a child. On to the next question. This is from Michael in Florida. Michael wants to quit his job and live on collected rents. What's the best way to do that? Justin, go.
For me, it's single-family rentals. But you've got to work for a period of time to build up enough to get to that point where you could quit your job. And what a lot of people find out is, say they bought 10 single-family rentals, that now their income from the rental property meets their income of their W-2 job, so they quit. But they find out that their lifestyle has gone up a little bit, or they don't have any money to continue to invest. So they have a gap kind of where they're not really progressing any further. They're just living off of that rental income. So they find themselves in a hole. I know a lot of people that have done that. They've built up a rental portfolio and now they stop working, and now what do they do with their life? So I think there's a balance there of you've got to. It's a great goal to have, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's just a matter of that build. Continue to build your portfolio, continue to grow, continue to work while you're trying to grow. I think having that extra income is huge when you're in the growth phase of your career.
And it also helps in getting bank loans too.
Yeah, for sure.
And health care. Or health insurance too, if you're getting that from your job. You can buy insurance
though, you just got to factor
expensive.
that in.
It's expensive.
It's very expensive.
Having that job, if it provides health care, you definitely want to think twice about leaving a job.
For us, it's an extra $1,200 a month. If you had a job that paid for it. So there's some additional expenses when you go on your own. There's no doubt about that. And get stuff paid off. Having all those mortgages, you can usually own less properties without debt and make more at the end of the year. So there's a balance there. There's that fine line of what is an acceptable amount of debt, where is my risk, and if you're going to quit, look at what happens if all of a sudden the market tanks and rents drop by a few $100 a door, because that could definitely happen. So look into some of those things and be conservative on your numbers. There's a lot of risk that goes into it sometimes, and when you've given up that W-2 job, you're not as easily apt to go back to work for somebody else, because it would be extremely painful, at least on my side.
I concur on that. Rob, what about you?
I agree.
How does Michael from Florida quit his job and live on collected rents?
Just start with one. Start with, whether it be a single family or a multi-unit, start with one and then, move on to the next. You've discussed house hacking before. That's not a bad strategy to get started. And just move forward until you feel comfortable. Go slowly and learn along the way. And, it's taken us all a number of years. We didn't start out, like this. It took us a number of years, and there's a big learning curve. Just, learn along the way, but start with one.
Yep. Yeah, and it's just a matter of time. It takes a little bit of time to grow your portfolio, and it snowballs into something bigger all the time. But when you lose that W-2 income, your snowball gets cut down quite substantially. So be careful and be conservative, because it does take away a big safety net.
Yeah. You can't just do it willy nilly. I think that which I've done in the past. I've done it willy nilly, and it ended up going back to my job because I realized all the things that you just said. But I think it's important to know your budget and your numbers. And I'm not just talking about a budget on paper, but having a profit and loss statement, having an income statement, so that you see what kind of income is coming in from your job, and what kind of expenses are you paying every month. Because that's going to tell you exactly how much money you need to get in passive income from your rentals. And that's a key number, because you want to exceed that, especially because once you no longer have a job, you may no longer have health care, and you're going to need, depending on the size of your family, you're going to need
extra money for
$5,000 to $20,000 to pay for health care insurance every year.
And there's other things too that you've got to project on your personal income. as well are your personal expenses. Just like with a rental property, you have capital improvements to your own house. You may need a new roof every so often, or you may want to replace windows or siding.
You
or
may
whatever.
need a new car.
Yeah, you may need a new car. You may
gotta-
want to
you
go
gotta
on
budget for
vacation.
that, yeah.
There's a lot of other things that you need. So don't just plan on, I make 40 grand a year, I need to, clear 40 grand a year on my rental properties. You may want to jump that number up another 10 or 20,000 bucks.
Yeah, it's a process. I don't think it's the rare person who can just quit their job today and then tomorrow be making, make a killing in real estate so that they're making all kinds of money. It took me a good 10 years to get to the point where I could leave my job because of my rental income. Start getting your numbers under control. Start getting your costs under control. Where are you spending money that you don't need to be spending money? Take a very conservative approach to getting to that point where you're going to leave a job and live off your rent income.
It's a great goal, though.
Well, let's wrap it up with a question that I wrote for you guys, because you guys have your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. So I'm wondering what signs you're seeing in the market currently, and we're in May of 2017. What signs are you seeing in the market, both positive and negative? And do you think we're heading into more economic troubles ahead, or that will affect real estate? Or do you think that the market will keep improving?
The Grand Rapids market is very different today than it was 5 years ago, there's no doubt. We have record low inventory of houses listed on the market. Our building has definitely jumped up again over the past year as far as number of new builds going in. The demand for housing, I think, is definitely there still. And as a result, prices have continued to jump. I mean, I've got a house early this spring we thought we'd sell for probably $225, and now we'll probably list it closer to $285.
Wow.
So in a matter of 4 to 5 months, we're talking about jumping our price 60 grand. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, I was conservative at my 225 number, but I was hoping I could push it further than that. But that was my conservative number going in. But there's nothing out there for sale, and everything that comes out goes way over price. I just went and looked at one last week. It was a friend's house. They listed it. And I told them they listed it too low, and it was a $280,000 house that ended up selling for $340,000. So it was 60 grand above asking price is what they accepted.
But haven't we seen this movie before?
We have. I mean, I think the difference right now is we're not as bad as we were in the last crash.
How so? I mean, because we're seeing those price increases over asking. We were seeing that before the last crash too. How are we different this time?
I think our lending requirements are still a little more stringent. My dog can't go get a home loan yet. There's some of those things that we're not to that point. But as I mentioned earlier, we're selling houses with people with sub 600 credit scores, which a couple years ago, if you didn't have above a 620 to 640, you couldn't buy a house. So our lending requirements have definitely loosened up. But I think the part of the issue is our new builds have not expanded fast enough to put us into that situation again. We're still at an inventory shortage temporarily, where we can't build fast enough to get caught up to that demand at this point.
So
I think that
whereas
will
before there was a lot of overbuilding going on,
there was
new subdivisions going up everywhere.
Yep.
But that's all very muted right now. You're not seeing
it is
as much of that development.
Before, you had a subdivision that was done and complete, and they had 10 houses that were for sale, but they were only listing 2 of them until those 2 sold. Then they'd list the next 2 and then the next 2 or whatever. Where today, as soon as they list one and it's not complete, it sells. So we don't have that inventory of overbuilt houses yet. So we still have that demand. So I don't think we're at that crash level yet. But we're catching up. I think we're getting closer all the time, where people are just building like crazy. And there's such a demand for housing right now and no inventory out there that it's definitely pushing the market up. I don't think it's going to last forever, but it's good right now if you're trying to sell something.
Mm-hmm. Rob, what about you from the rental ownership standpoint? I mean, obviously rents are strong, occupancy is strong. Are you still able to raise the rents like you were the past couple of years?
I am. There's a profound demand, not only for rental properties, but for single families. And, both of them, there's a shortage of supply. And it really is just supply and demand right now. And Justin's exactly right. They have not overbuilt like they did previously. And, there are many qualified people that cannot find places. I mean, I see properties that go up and, the first day they have 30 offers and then they say, look, we'll take the highest 3 and highest
From
and best.
renters?
Yeah. No, for single family houses, but for renters also in certain properties, yes, they'll be like, look, I'm willing to pay more.
Yeah.
And I mean, it surprises me all the time because I already feel like rents are quite high.
Yeah. But you look at some of the new big projects that are coming online downtown, and I think the lenders are starting to fear this more, where they've switched from all apartments to now they're doing condos,
Hotels.
apartments, hotels in the same building, where originally it was slated for all apartments. So I think they're starting to see or have that fear of maybe overbuilding apartments downtown, especially the Class A apartment that may be, nearing capacity or at capacity. But I think in the BC area still, there's a lot of value out there yet. There's a lot of stuff that isn't available. There's nothing on the market. So I think that is going to continue to drive those prices up and that demand up.
Yeah, and that's where I'm frustrated, is because I look for the B and C apartment communities to buy. And here in West Michigan, there's virtually nothing on the market. And when it does come to market, there's multiple bidders. It's unpriced. And I can't justify the value or the price with the value that I'm going to get out of it and the returns that I need to provide to my investors. So from that standpoint, I think that I'm getting mixed signals, because from a standpoint of what people are paying for B and C multifamily and apartments, I think people may be overpaying. Now, perhaps rents will continue to increase, and they'll be getting a bargain. It'll appear that they're getting a bargain. But to me right now, I can't see that in my numbers when I run my spreadsheet. But then the developers, I went to a commercial real estate conference last week with developers and multifamily brokers, and they're all very upbeat and very positive. That says, hey, it's blue skies ahead.
West Michigan's still a growing area.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in it for the long haul, I think you'll be okay. If you're going to buy it and own it for the next 20 years, I think you're going to be okay, because you can survive that small dip if we have one, or a big dip if we have one, and it'll come back around and you'll be fine later on. I think if you're trying to buy something, drive the pricing up and dump it in 2 or 3 years, that I would be concerned. I think that would be the issue, or what I would be afraid of today, is if you're going to own it for 10, 20 years, it's high, but in 10 or 20 years, it'll probably be higher. I mean, I think that's the reality of just general appreciation. But,
Valid point.
Yeah.
so I think it depends on your strategy and what you're shooting for at this point. So
Yeah, perhaps the excess has been wrung out of the market by the current prices and valuations that these properties are being sold at. So if you plan on doing a long-term hold, great.
Yeah.
You'll probably turn out to be okay. But if you're planning on flipping it or turning it in a couple years, that may not be the best strategy.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I think that's where it's at. I think if you're doing something very short term, if you're flipping a house, I think it's completely fine. And if you're going to hold it for a long period of time, I think you're fine as well. I think it's just that mid-range stuff that is a little scary in my mind. And I still see a lot of empty houses that were foreclosed on 6-8 years ago. So
that shadow inventory is still sitting there, huh?
it still lingers.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It still lingers out there.
Yeah,
So
those are hidden time bombs to me.
They
I mean,
are.
at some point, that shadow inventory that you're still seeing it.
yeah.
It's out there.
Yep.
Why aren't they selling these off? I mean, what's going on?
They're waiting to capitalize on that further appreciation growth.
Wow. Okay. So the hedge funds who own them or the banks that own them, seem to think there's still some upside on those. Why sell them now when maybe the market will go even higher?
Yeah. Last year I could have sold it for, I don't know, say 50 grand. This year I could sell it for 70, just because of the appreciation jump, the demand that's out there. So why not hold it on to another year and see if it'll jump to 90 or 100? That's a major appreciation jump with those properties.
There are many people that are doing that as well. I mean,
it's not just hedge funds.
Correct.
There's a lot of individuals that own vacant property out there that are just waiting for that to time the market correctly and dump them at the right time. So.
All right. Okay. Wow.
It's a scary world out there. So be conservative.
Be conservative. Run your numbers. Know your numbers super well.
Yeah. Don't overproject.
Yeah. Don't get too optimistic. I don't think it's a time for optimism, but it's not a time for blind optimism.
The reason all three of us are sitting here today is because we were conservative.
Yeah. And we bought it at a good. I mean, we bought at the bottom of an up market.
We did. We got lucky with timing, for a while, for sure. Yeah. But at the same time, we were the ones that were willing to take the risks as well. So I guess it goes back to Warren Buffett. Be fearful when everybody's greedy, and be greedy when everybody's fearful.
It's true.
Right now, I think everybody is greedy out there, so I'm fairly fearful. I see people every day buying houses to flip or as rentals, and some of them I kind of question should they be buying them or not. But they're in my mind overpaying for them. But good luck to them.
In the long term, they'll be all right as long as they're smart.
Yeah, in the long term it'll come around. But if they planned on a 2 or 3 year opportunity, maybe I'll be there in a couple years to help them out a bit.
I hear you.
I tell everybody the best thing that could happen to me is we have a crash. People think it's crazy, but I mean, I'm in a great position to buy again, so it'd be great if prices drop dramatically and we could pick up some stuff for a great deal again.
All right. Well, Justin, Rob, thanks again for coming back and helping to answer these questions. I think we had some good discussions here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. It was always fun.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.